Hi, Steve.
Hi, Yevgen. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm great.
Jak sprawy, jak smash, jak sprawy.
Дуже добре, а у тебе
Come
як
sta?
справи?
Дуже.
So, can you tell us how did you become interested in languages, maybe very briefly, and
Sure.
how did you succeed to speak so many languages?
Right. So, I mean, it was never my goal to speak so many languages. But, I like to say that when I was like 16, we had French at school, but I couldn't speak it. I mean, I passed my tests and stuff like that. And then I had a professor who very much motivated me. He made French culture, civilization, music. The films in those days, La Nouvelle Vague, I don't know if you remember, Jules et Jim, all those movies, Jean-Paul Belmondo and stuff. Anyway, so I got interested. Once you're interested in a language, you can learn it. That's the basic secret of language learning. If you're motivated, you'll learn. Then I went to France for 3 years. Came back. I worked for the Canadian government at a time when Canada was getting ready to recognize the People's Republic of China. So I volunteered, send me. So I went off to Hong Kong, learned Chinese, and I lived in Japan. And I did a lot of business subsequently in the lumber business in Europe. So a number of languages were very useful: German, Spanish, Swedish. And then at the age of 60, I decided to learn Russian. Basically because I always took the approach that you don't want to focus on grammar. You can look at grammar from time to time, but you basically have to do a lot of listening and reading. And so people say, oh, with Russian you can't do that because the grammar is so complicated. So that was kind of a challenge. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. Plus, when I was a teenager, I had read Russian novels in English, so I wanted to read them in Russian. So, and then once you can do it, and of course I set up Link with my son, which is a language learning platform. And so since the age of 60, I've learned like 10 languages, and right now I'm working on Persian and Arabic.
Oh my God!
So right now it's my main hobby. It's my main obsession is to learn languages. Every day I get up before my wife. I make breakfast. I'm listening to my languages. I clean up by listening to my languages.
Yeah, this is amazing. On peut parler en français si vous
Bien
voulez.
sûr.
Je pense que
Oui.
vous êtes très à l'aise en français. C'est
Oui.
peut-être votre langue plus fort. Qu'est-ce que vous
Oui.
pensez?
Oui, absolument, parce que j'ai vécu en France 3 ans. J'ai fait mes études en France. Enfin, pour moi, le français, c'est presque ma deuxième langue maternelle. Et j'aime beaucoup. Enfin, j'aime toutes les langues que j'apprends, mais je crois que le français, c'est sûrement la langue que je parle le mieux. Et suivi par le japonais, par exemple. Parce que j'ai vécu 9 ans au Japon.
Combien de temps vous avez vécu?
9 ans. 9 ans au Japon.
Ah, vraiment? C'est incroyable.
Oui, oui, oui.
Podemos cambiar en español? Sí.
Sí, por supuesto. Por
Usted
supuesto.
dijo que usted vivió 9 años en Japón, ¿sí?
Sí,
¿Y
sí,
cómo es
sí.
la vida en Japón? La gente, mentalidad, se nota que es muy diferente.
Sí, bueno, sí, bueno, 80% de la mentalidad de las personas es lo mismo, ¿no? Pero hay diferencias, hay cosas en la cultura japonesa que son muy interesantes, gente muy amable, muy honesta, bueno, que me gustaba mucho. Pero es un país con una densidad de población muy fuerte. Entonces, a la fin de la semana es muy difícil escaparse de la multitud de gente que está por todas las partes, ¿no? Pero no, me gustaba mucho la cultura, la gente y todo.
Ok,
Sí.
podemos... y usted habla italiano, ¿vero?
Certo, parlo italiano, ma soprattutto quando viaggio in Italia, no? Adesso per me è un po' più difficile parlare perché è difficile, è come tutte le lingue che sono un poco simile, no? Para non mescolare l'italiano con spagnolo, con portoghese, è un po'
Mm,
poco
sì.
difficile. No, quando sto in Italia parlo tutti i giorni, non ho nessun problema per parlare. Sì, e tu anche parli italiano.
Sì, mi
Parla,
piacciono
parla.
lingue straniere anche. E io sono stato in Italia, ma solo 3 giorni.
Mhm.
Vorrebbe viaggiare più in Italia.
Sì, è un...
Sì, in che città
Sì.
in Italia lei è stato?
Con mia moglie abbiamo visitato dal nord al sud, Sicilia, Reggio Calabria, Perugia, Roma, Umbria, tutto, no?
Ah,
Genova, eh,
ok.
anche Alto Adige, tutte le, tutto. Sì, sono stato in Italia stesso.
Okay. Du sprichst Deutsche auch? Das stimmt?
Ja, auch. Das stimmt. Ich habe also Geschäft in Deutschland gemacht. Ich habe sehr viel. Also, das war in den 90er Jahren. Jetzt habe ich es ein bisschen vergessen. Aber sowieso, ich verstehe, ich kann sprechen. Und ja,
Hm.
also gab eine Zeit, ich war immer an der Autobahn in Stau mit meinem Agenten und wir haben sehr viel Deutsch gesprochen. Aber jetzt
Hm.
wenig.
Für mich Deutsch ist sehr schwierig. Ich
Mhm.
habe Niveau A1. Das ist wirklich schwierig. Ich will Sprache besser, aber ich kann nicht.
Mhm.
Vielleicht du kannst mir helfen. Como,
Ok. Ja, ja.
eh, sì. Você fala português? Sim?
Sì, parlo portoghese, ma sempre con una mistura di spagnolo. Parlo portugnol. Perché bisogno, no, è importante, no, se è un po' difficile per me parlare in portugués a causa dell'influenza dell'espagnolo. Ma se vuoi passar, visitar a Brasil, falar todos con las pessoas, vou falar melhor. Ma adesso, no, adesso, agora per me è un po' difficile falar. Ho confusione entre todas as idiomas, as línguas.
Por me também. І
Sì.
я знаю, що ви говорите українською мовою.
Я вивчав українську. Я починав вивчати російську мову, а потім вирішив, що хочу вивчати також українську. Україна для мене це дуже цікавий край. Boy, I get confused here. Край. Країна. No, дуже трудно
Складно.
слав'янські язики дуже мови. Слав'янські мови дуже похожі. Похожі? No, what would you say?
Схожі.
Похожі друг другим. Для цього це інколи трудно. Але коли я був в Україні, був в Львові, я говорив, я розмовляв багато по-українськи.
Чудово. Думаю, українці
Я
пишатимуться.
розумію. На мою думку, саме важне це розуміння. Треба розуміти. І коли я розмовляю з людьми, Yes, якщо я использую or уживаю слов польський, чеський, русський, це не важно. Люди мене
Розуміють.
розуміють. Я розумію, що вони скажуть. Це все.
Це найголовніше, ви вважаєте.
Не головніше.
Yeah, so we can maybe switch back in English and
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's this sort of mental gymnastics of flipping back and forth from different languages. In a way, you have to kind of get into one. So if I'm in a country, if I'm in Italy, then I'm just focused on Italian. Or if I'm in Brazil, I'm focused on Portuguese. But just now, sort of casually switching back and forth, I find it a little difficult because you kind of get confused. You're not confident that the word you're going to use is actually Spanish or Portuguese or Russian or Ukrainian or Polish. So, but the main thing to me is comprehension.
Yeah, but your Ukrainian is great.
Well, I don't know about that, but I have to tell you that and I haven't done any, like I'm working on Persian and Arabic right now. But if I were to do some listening and reading in Ukrainian, because with the Slavic languages, there's always these endings that are a problem. And so you have to kind of be in it in order to get them right. Otherwise, it's difficult if you leave them. But I have to tell you that I really enjoyed getting to know Ukraine. I knew very little about Ukraine. I think there's a general perception that Ukraine is like almost Russia, like it's just, it used to be, of course, in the Soviet Union, and it was in Tsar's Russia. And Ukraine is just like a variant of Russia. And of course, the Russians like to make you believe that that's the case. But when you go there, and then I did a lot of reading on Ukrainian history, going right back to, Kiev and Rus and Lviv and Lithuania and Poland and the whole thing. And it's a country very much of its own. And the best thing, well, there's many good things in Ukraine, but one of the good things is the food. Not only Ukrainian food, okay, and I like salo with a little bit of horlika, but whenever they cook anything, it's very, very good. So if you have Italian food in Ukraine, whatever, I just found the food is very good and good value. So anyway, I like traveling in Ukraine. It's a great country, relatively undiscovered from a tourist point of view.
Exactly, it's very underrated. So people sometimes go in Ukraine there is a cheap flight. Okay, I will go to Ukraine. And they are surprised in a good way in this way. Even in Kiev, like I live in Kiev, it's amazing. People don't realize how interesting our city. So you can witness, you can agree.
There's lots to see, lots of history. And as I say, the food, like Kiev, the worst thing in Kiev is the traffic. Other than that, it's a great city, lots to see, traffic, yes.
Yeah.
It's a little bit at times. I've been on buses where I got off the bus and started walking because I was going to get there faster walking. But
you did try and use a bus instead of using taxi all the time. So you.
Oh yeah, well the taxi wasn't moving either, but it depends on the traffic. I'll sometimes take a taxi too, for sure. But and even Uber, I've used Uber in Lviv, and I'm not sure maybe I used Uber in Kiev. I used Uber in Dnipro. Yeah. But I like to walk. I'm a big walker. And if the city is small enough, like Dnipro, I just walked. And then I was on the front there. I was in Krasnohorivka, which is just on the line.
Really?
Oh yeah. And I saw all the damage from the shelling and stuff like that. Met the people there.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but I hope one day. I hope one day.
I hope one day,
you come in Kiev and we can have a walk.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, Kiev is a great city.
Also, you said that you were surprised that we are bilingual. And people talk in Russian and other people, and nobody switches and everybody understands each other.
It's amazing, because Canada is a bilingual country, but in Canada, it's not really bilingual. Even in Quebec, I would say in Quebec, people are more bilingual. And in Montreal, people are very bilingual. But here in Vancouver, you won't find very many people who speak French. But in Ukraine, and I'm interested in this whole subject of language, which is, of course, sometimes becomes a big issue in Ukraine. But even in the east, like in Dnipro, or I went to Zaporizhia that was an Uber. I took an Uber driver, and everyone speaks Russian as their natural language, but they can all speak Ukrainian. And and people talk to each other. One person is speaking Ukrainian, the other speaking Russian, and don't think anything of it. Like it's absolutely just it's amazing.
Because in Canada, I think you choose one language. You either speak, both people speak either French or English.
Exactly. And it's interesting. So in Canada, like the Prime Minister also always has to speak in both French and English. Even if his French, like we had a French Canadian Prime Minister whose English wasn't very good, but he would always have to speak English. And the same, if we have a Prime Minister whose French isn't good, he also always has to speak English. But in Ukraine, where everybody speaks both languages, the President and the Prime Minister are not allowed to speak Russian. In any public event, they have to speak Ukrainian. So the politics are quite different.
Yeah, politics is very interesting. It's worth learning Ukrainian language just to follow our events. Something is happening all the time. I think.
I know.
Maybe it's better to have a boring politics. Maybe like if.
Maybe.
Maybe. But also, yes. I would like to share your like secrets, like methods, how to become like obtain language skills, and maybe we can,
sure.
Maybe we can start. Yes, so maybe you can introduce your how is your method different from standard? Like as far as I know, you emphasize on practice instead of theory. So how is your method different from standard?
So I don't. It's not so much practice. Like my emphasis is on input, because most people who are learning languages are not in the country where the language is spoken. Obviously, if you're in the country where the language is spoken, you're going to try to use it every day. When I was in Japan, day one, I was out trying to talk to people. But if you're not in the country where the language is spoken, it's very difficult to do that. It's not because you speak with someone twice a week on Skype that you're going to improve very much. So that the best way is to do a lot of listening and reading, and to allow the brain to get used to the language, and not to be too preoccupied about the details of grammar, because until the brain has become a little bit familiar with the language through massive input, listening and reading, the grammar explanations don't relate to anything that you're familiar with, and therefore you waste a lot of time trying to nail down the details of grammar, in my experience. Whereas if you wait until you've had this input, the grammar explanations will make more sense. So I'm very much input oriented, and that's the way we set up our website link. So nowadays you can listen to things and not understand. You can then read the transcript. You can look up the words, online dictionaries, and so you sort of gradually start to acquire a sense of familiarity with the language. But it's always based on lots of listening and reading, lots of input. And when you get an opportunity to use the language, for sure use it. So if I were, German, if you were to work hard on your German, a lot of listening and reading, increase your vocabulary, have a high level of comprehension. If you go to Germany, now you can start using it the minute you arrive. Whereas if you don't have that, if you don't build up your language potential through listening and reading, then it's very difficult to start using the language.
How about to break this A1 beginner level? So I understand if you can understand something, it's easier. So you can listen. But if your level is very, very basic, how to, should you start with very simple text or?
Okay, so again, I think in traditional language textbooks, they have texts that they say are simple, but are not really so simple. And they typically take you from, the train station to the post office to the doctor's office. And there's very little repetition. And what we do at Link, for example, we have what I call our mini stories, 60 mini stories, which we have in Ukrainian, by the way. We have 42 languages. We have, in every language you have the mini stories. Each mini story is about 5 minutes long, and everything is repeated 5 times in the story. And so what I do is I listen, like I did this for Greek, I did it for Persian, for Arabic, for Turkish. So I listen, I understand nothing. Then I read it, I look up words. Then I listen again. And pretty soon I can get to the point where I understand about 10 or 15% when I listen, and maybe I understand 40, 50% when I read, because I forget. You look a word up in a dictionary, you forget right away. When I have like 30, 40% comprehension in a story, I move to the next story, and the next, and the next. And then I go back to the first. And in a month, the first few stories, you understand them 60%. So there's always certain parts that you won't understand for a long time. And I work my way through these 60 mini stories, and there's so much repetition, and it just takes you. And I did this for Persian and Arabic, where the writing system is difficult. Like even Cyrillic is difficult for someone who's not used to Cyrillic, but it's not as difficult as a Persian or Arabic writing system is. So that's what I do, and it gets you started. And so and you don't have to start at the beginning. Hello, how are you? My name, and that'll come up anyway. It's just starts, okay, I get up, I have a cup of coffee, I drive my car to work, I meet my colleagues and stuff. Very simple, everyday life type of situation. But the mini stories, there's so much repetition. The story is, we tell a story about George, and then George tells the story about himself, and then we ask questions about what, and you need text with lots of repetition and a lot of high frequency verbs. Because we need a lot of verbs to say things, and we need to get the high frequency verbs. Go, come, say, give, take, need, want, all these verbs. And you get them, and then you're on your way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I start. I've started, yeah.
Very interesting. And then maybe, so what you say is already different than maybe the so-called standard approach. So maybe you can tell us also. For me, it's also because I'm a learner, but I also a teacher. I'm also a teacher. So can you tell most common mistakes that learners make, and maybe teachers, the teachers when they teach?
I think that in no particular order, one major mistake is the desire to master anything. You're not going to master it. And so the teacher that teaches something, if you're teaching Russian or Ukrainian, so, like the case endings are very difficult. So you say, okay, today we're going to teach you the instrumental case, and then we're going to give you a test. But there's no way the person's going to learn it. The instrumental case might start to stick 6 months later. It's a gradual process. And so one shouldn't be looking to master things. One should be looking to expose one's brain to the language as much as possible, acquiring words, and looking at finding ways to enjoy the process. Because if you enjoy it, if you find it interesting, anything that makes it enjoyable. So if I listen to stuff, I want to the voice has to be pleasant that I'm listening to. And if you're enjoying it and you're not worrying about anything and you're just working on comprehension, letting the language come in, there will come a point where you become more and more curious about, say, cases in Russian. How do they work? And because you're not entirely sure which case is that. And then slowly, as you're interested, you have a better chance of remembering those things. But I think a big problem is this emphasis on trying to master things, particularly early on. And I think the emphasis should be on enjoyment and comprehension. And there'll be plenty of opportunity to go back in and fix up the details.
Okay, what about when teachers correct students? Is it okay, or how often should they correct?
It's kind of useless. You can, if a student, I have taught on Link, we have, online tutoring, and you can correct if they make the same mistake over and over and over again, you might correct them. There's a tremendous temptation to correct people. If you're a native speaker and you hear them saying something incorrectly, there's this great temptation to correct them. In my experience, it doesn't do much. You know, at Link, when I have a session with my tutor in, say, Persian or whatever, I get a report with all the words that I used incorrectly. So she doesn't correct me while we're speaking, but then I got a list of all the things that I didn't say properly, or I couldn't find the word, or there was a grammatical mistake. And so, and I have these, I import them as lessons into Link. And so I have them all, going back, say, 6-8 months. And I see that I make the same mistakes every week. So even if you correct someone, they're not going to necessarily get it right. But slowly, I think people, mostly they correct their own mistakes. And I sometimes hear people say, well, you know, the child, if the mother didn't correct the child wouldn't end up speaking correctly. That's simply not true. That's just nonsense. Because the child learns mostly from being around other people speaking the language and hearing the language. Otherwise, immigrants would end up speaking like their parents, but they don't. In Canada, we get immigrants from all over. The parents speak English very poorly, or French, and speak with an accent, and their kids are perfectly fluent and have no accent. So it's not the parents correcting this, the children. The children pick it up. So I think correcting people is overdone. You can do it, but people often say what's more useful is if the person says something incorrectly, then continue the conversation and use that form, that structure, and use it correctly. And maybe the learner will pick it up. Because the better process. Yeah, and don't say, no, that's wrong. But just, you know, use the wrong thing and then answer them in a way that uses it correctly. Exactly. And so then they might notice it. They might notice it and pick it up. And not the first time, but third or fourth or fifth time they'll start to pick it up. Otherwise, they'll pick it up. They'll pick it up themselves. They'll hear it. Very often we're aware when we're not speaking correctly. We kind of know we're kind of... So then the next time you're listening or you're reading, you're trying to focus in on those things that you have trouble with. Mm-hmm. So...
And
see, the big thing with correcting is if you're having a conversation with someone and you correct them all the time, it says, I'm not interested in communicating with you, I just want to correct you. And that's more stressful and less fun. Whereas if it's just we're communicating, we're enjoying the language, that's less stressful, more fun.
Mm-hmm. And self-correction is better if you try to control yourself.
Yeah, you just gradually, some of the corrections you notice, sometimes you just start using the language more correctly. There's a slow, gradual process of getting better. We don't get worse. We only get better. But you have to want to get better. So some people
And what about this grammar? So usually when I teach English and when I was learning English, we had this part with like grammar tests and grammar exercises like put. So you have words, for example, go, put it in present perfect, past tense, and...
I hate that. I hate that with a passion. I never do it. You know, if I buy a book on learning whatever language and then they have these exercises, I never do them. Much, much better to see examples. I have some good books on grammar. I have a good book on Ukrainian grammar. I have one on Russian grammar. And all they give is examples. No tests, just examples. Here's how this is said in this language. Examples, examples, examples. No tests. I hate tests. Anything that causes you to think, like I also don't like tests like comprehension questions. Why did Mr. So-and-so do this? Now I got to try to remember that. So in our mini stories, we say, John went to the store. Then the question is, did John go to the restaurant? No, John went to the store. You have the answer. It's just exposure. More and more exposure. I don't do those tests. It's stressful. It's you're setting people up to fail, creating a lot of negative feelings. I'm totally against those.
Okay, it's so you are breaking a lot of stereotypes. So
yes.
Many teachers will be outraged. How can you say? But you can. You have. You can prove that you are successful in learning languages. So you've learned so many languages. So how can you be?
Right.
How can you be?
I know. I mean, you can always go back in later on. Like if you pick up a book on English grammar and some of those explanations about tenses, and all the exceptions. And the same for Russian grammar. It's so complicated because the language is it's a living thing, and you can't account for every possible event. It's used this way, but sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's something else. Who can remember those things? You have to develop habits, correct habits, and these habits will gradually get better if you enjoy the language, if you listen a lot, if you start speaking. You're aware when you're struggling, where you know you didn't quite say that correctly, and it's a gradual process, but it should be an enjoyable process. So I think the role of the teacher is to help the student find, say, content of interest at their level that they can listen to and read, and guide them. And when they have questions, answer those questions. And to encourage them, and stimulate them, and motivate them. And then the learners will learn.
Mm-hmm. So also you emphasized, and in my experience, listening to audio materials is very, very useful because you can walk and listen, you can ride the bike, you can clean your room. So
riding the bike, I'm not sure if there's a lot of traffic around. Yeah, but you can for sure clean the room. I mean, that's every day. I make breakfast. I clean up after breakfast. I clean up after dinner. My wife makes a very nice meal, but I clean up. So that's guaranteed 30, 40 minutes of listening. And then I like to work out, like to exercise. So if I do some exercising, I listen. If I'm in the car, I listen. If you're on the bus, you can listen. And the listen, and it's so easy today with these MP3 files. Like in my iPhone, I've got, like an enormous library of content in all these different languages that I can listen to. And when you listen, there's always parts you don't understand. And then I like to be able to read what I listen to. I don't like to leave it that I just didn't understand it. I like to then read it and save, using Link, I can save words and phrases for later review. And so that the listening triggers my curiosity. And initially I listen to things like the mini stories to get started, but eventually I move as soon as I can into things of interest. And so for my Persian, for example, there's a girl in Iran, and she has created phenomenal content for us at Link, audio with text, on the history of Iran, the food of Iran. We've done, like on Ukrainian, I got these students of my Ukrainian teacher. She's also teaches at the, Ivan Franco University. And so she got her students they all talk about themselves and what they do and what they like to do. And one likes to dance and the other one likes to learn music. And so you're just listening and getting to know these people. And so I think the big role of a language teacher is to help the learners find content of interest and at their level, and to keep them motivated.
So you created this platform that accumulates all you need to learn languages, right? That you
Correct,
talk about, link.com.
Yeah, lingq.com.
Mm-hmm.
We'll send you a complimentary membership, by the way.
Ah, thank you.
Get on it. You can get on and work on your German.
Oh, no, thank you. And we will put in the description box
Okay.
link to your website, and people like your approach.
Yeah.
Also, what I wanted to also, like speaking clubs, now it's a very available instrument that people can use.
Right.
I think they are also very useful. So even like basically.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So like listening to a lot of audio materials and attending speaking club can get you really, really far.
Mm-hmm. I have never sort of taken that approach, the speaking club approach. Obviously, it's a good thing to do because, say, if you're living in Ukraine and learning English, then you have you don't have much opportunity to speak English. But I wouldn't spend a lot of time in speaking clubs. I still think that listening and reading, because when you're listening to the native, typically. And that's a very high quality. And if it's high resonance, like if you're interested, you like the voice, you like the content, that's really good high resonance for your brain to pick up the language. If you're in a speaking club, and everybody is, of the same nationality, you're going to be influenced by their accent. Some people are going to speak very well. Some people will speak better than you, which can be a little demotivating. And some people don't speak very well at all, which is annoying. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time in those. But you need a chance to use what you're learning. So you got to do that. But I would say once a week max.
Mm-hmm. And what about like people are, especially in Ukraine, are obsessed with native speakers. If they are going to a speaking club, they want to have a native speaker. Is it so important to have a native?
No, I think in the case of if you're doing a lot of listening to native speaker content, because that's what we want to listen to. Like if I'm going to learn Ukrainian, I'm not going to listen to an American speaking Ukrainian. However, he might be really good, but if he has a slight American accent, I don't want to hear him. I want to hear the native. But the speaking club, the objective of the speaking club is to speak, not to listen to the others. So the focus on the listening and getting the accent right and getting that feel for the language, that's when you're listening, and you're listening to native material. It could be a podcast on marketing from the US. Like, for example, people who are now into, online marketing and stuff. There's so many tremendous podcasts. I mean, there's so many podcasts on any subject. You can find a podcast on the history of Rome, on the history of, you name it. But those are natives, so that's great. And that's your focus for listening. The speaking club is for speaking. And you almost have to shut off what other people are saying so you aren't too much influenced by them. And if you happen to have one native speaker there, I guess that helps to sell the speaking club. But to me, it's not a big deal. And I think insofar as the teacher to me is largely a motivator and an explainer and a guide and someone who encourages you. And so whether he's or she is a native speaker or not is not so important. What is important is that the content you are listening to most of the time is native speaker content. English is a little different from other languages, right? Because English now you've got people who are German, Swedish, Dutch, whatever, and they all speak English very, very well. So it's less native speaker focused. Like if I'm learning Persian, I'm not going to learn it from a non-native speaker. But for English, it's almost becoming an international language. I think it's much more acceptable to have non-native speakers as teachers.
Thank you. It's very, very interesting. I agree with you because people are obsessed with native speakers, but you can find them, like you say, you can listen 24 hours. So, So what?
The teacher is your companion. The teacher is the person who's going to get you across the finish line. The teacher is not the source of the language. The source of the language is all over. And even in terms of grammar explanations, the teacher knows the grammar, but you can easily Google. If I Google Russian case endings or verbs of motion, which are the difficult things in Slavic languages, I can find all the explanations and examples and everything I want. I can find thousands, tens of thousands of websites which have that information. To me, the teacher is more the person who's holding you by the hand and who's pushing you or encouraging you and helping you and guiding you. So that person can be native or non-native.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you have some time, we can also, I have a few more questions.
Sure.
So what about like practical application like Duolingo? Do you think it something like this type of...
I started using it. Now, you have to recognize that I'm somewhat prejudiced because I think our system is better, Link. But I started using it for Greek. And I just found it was hopeless because there's a lot of sort of not connected sentences and phrases that don't make much sense. And I like to get into something real. I start with our mini stories. I listen. It's one whole story. It's natural sound. And so to me, Duolingo, yeah, it's free and some people like it. It's sort of a gamification of language learning and it appeals to certain people, but it doesn't appeal to me. But people can combine that with something else, and people like different things. The main thing is to enjoy the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be only one thing.
Right.
Have you heard of a YouTube channel that called Easy Languages? They have an interesting...
Yeah. I think I've seen a few of those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So the idea, they do street interviews with native speakers. For example, you learn German, they speak to German speakers on the street, and then they put subtitles beneath, both in German and in English. So what do you think is that strategy, like to listen to native speakers, but at the same time have subtitled, transcribe their text? Does it help, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's good. The different. It's like watching movies with subtitles in your language, right? I think the biggest function of those things is that it stimulates you and encourages you. I still believe that I cannot spend hours every day watching videos. I can spend hours every day listening. Like the other day, I was cleaning up here in the house. For 4 hours, I was listening to Persian while cleaning the house. I can't do that with videos. So videos are somewhat limited. Even like videos, if I get a video, like we have a browser extension at Link where I can import videos, and that creates texts. So then I can go read the texts, and it also gives you the audio file. So I can go away and listen, and then I can read and save words. And when you're just dealing with words, I think that's a more intense learning scenario. Whereas when you're watching a video, there's a lot of stuff happening that's helping you. And so it's stimulating. Like when I started learning Russian, I got DVDs of Russian movies. I would put on the English subtitles. I still remember the first Russian movie I watched was called, what was it called again? Zhestoki Romance. Took place in 19th century Russia on the Volga. Like, it's so exotic. It's so attractive. It stimulates you. But I can't spend the day watching the movie. So now I'm totally motivated to learn Russian. So I think a lot of these video things, they get you motivated. But I think you can't get away from the need to read and listen. And to listen where there is no video, you're just listening. That's more powerful. You have to create the meaning from the words now.
And can you listen to the same piece over and over again? Does it affect you?
Yeah, there is this, there's a very good book written in German by this German neuroscientist, and he talks about the brain. And the brain needs repetition, but the brain needs novelty. And there's a lot of research to show that the more you repeat and repeat and repeat, the less you're learning. And you're better off to listen for a while or to read this and then go and do something else and then come back. And so what I do with our mini stories where there is a lot of repetition, I don't listen to the same story over and over and over again. I listen to story 1, then story 2, story 3, story 4, story 5, then I go back to story 1. So you do need the repetition, and there is natural repetition because sort of high frequency words and phrases will repeat naturally in different contexts. But I don't think I think it's been proven that, for example, if you're going to study a list, the more you try and learn that list, the less you're learning each time. And so you need to kind of make sure you mix repetition with novelty. The brain likes novelty, new things.
And what percentage of this piece can be unknown words? It has to be 90%.
Well, obviously, when you start, it's 100%, right? If it's a new language, you've got nothing. Now, if you are an English speaker learning French, you've automatically got a whole bunch of words that you can identify. If you're a Ukrainian speaker learning Polish, you've automatically got a whole bunch of words that you can identify. But if I learn Persian, I got nothing. And so then I work my mini stories. But I find that if at a certain point, I would say that to me, a sweet spot, and we measure this at Link, a sweet spot is 10 to 20% unknown words. If you've got 2% unknown words, it's too easy. You're not picking up new words. Anything over 20% is hard work. Now, if you're very interested, like I was very interested to read Tolstoy in Russian. So I was at 50% new words, and I was just kind of fighting my way through it because I was very motivated. But it's hard work. If you get to less than 20%, new words, 15%, because some of those new words are going to be names. The way it's measured on our system, it can't distinguish initially whether it's a name or a genuine word. And if it's a name, I ignore it. But 10-15% is a good level. If you are reading a book away from the computer, then 5% max. max, because otherwise it's hard. And if you read a book, you can pass over the words, but you won't learn them. I don't like to read away from the computer if there's more than 5% unknown words.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. And also I wanted to talk about future. Maybe what do you think in learning languages in 21st century? Maybe like we have a lot of challenges, like apps that can translate you everything, so you don't need to learn language. So do you think it's a threat?
Right.
Or also for
No,
translators? So
bigger threat for translators. Threat for translators. But people who enjoy learning languages, and I'm sure you and I are in that category. It's the connection. It's reading about the history of Iran. It's connecting with, here in Vancouver, we have a lot of immigrants from Iran. In stores, many of them work in stores or in pharmacies or whatever. If I go in there and I chat them up in Iranian, I mean, that's a lot of fun for me. I think they enjoy that I've learned their language. There's a human connection there. If I go in there with an app and I speak into my iPhone and out comes Iranian, that's nothing. There's no connection there. So if anything, the technology is making it easier. For example, all of our MP3 technology, online dictionaries, just what we're doing at Link, that I can bring in Netflix, subtitles as text into Link to learn from, so that now I can watch Netflix series in Turkish and I can learn Turkish. Or even the automatic transcription. I get these podcasts in Arabic, which I only understand like 20%. I put it on there's an automatic transcription website called Happy Transcribe. And I pay $10 a month or so, and I get a lot of the stuff transcribed. Very accurate. So now, all these podcasts that are out there, and especially in English, anyone learning English, I mean, they're in the best position because there's so much stuff in English. Not the case in other languages, but for English, it's limitless. And so you can now get it all transcribed. So then you can read it and you can look up words. And so I think the technology is making it easier to learn languages. And I had my iPhone, and I was in Vietnam. I couldn't speak Vietnamese, and when I really needed something, then I would go to that and I would speak into it, and I would get the Vietnamese and I'd show it to the person. But that's not communicating with someone. But as an example, I was in a plane flying from Iguazu Falls in Brazil to Rio, and there's a gentleman sitting beside me, and he has he doesn't look typically Brazilian. He looks more Germanic or something. So we start chatting. He's from Paraguay. He's Ukrainian. So we were speaking Ukrainian all the way from Iguazu to Rio. Those are connections, You can't do that. And we spoke for like 30, 40 minutes. You're not going to do that with your app. So, No, I think it's just going to make it easier. Just going to make it easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great to talk. We could talk many hours.
Languages, I can talk forever on languages.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you.
So I'll turn off. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, people can. We will put description to your platform.
Okay.
People can find you, and I hope you once come to Kiev and we can meet in person. It would be a great experience.
Sounds good. I'd love to. Definitely.